Vamos começar. Antes de mais nada, queria apresentar aqui os componentes da mesa. A professora Belinda Mandelbaum, e o nosso convidado, Éric Smadja, Smadja. Não temos uma pronúncia correta em português.
Éric Smadja, sim. Éric Smadja.
O Dr. Éric Smadja é psiquiatra e psicanalista, membro da Société Psychanalytique de Paris e da Associação Psicanalítica Internacional. É também psicanalista de casais, antropólogo, membro associado da American Anthropological Association, da Society for Psychological Anthropology. E em 2007 recebeu o prêmio IPA pela contribuição excepcional à pesquisa psicanalítica. Seus trabalhos são de natureza pluri e interdisciplinar, palestrante internacional, é autor dos seguintes livros: O Riso, a série QCG, Arte Universitaire de France, né, 93, foi editado em inglês, em japonês, espanhol, turco, chinês, coreano e ucraniano.
And not in Portuguese.
Ainda não. Not yet.
Unfortunately.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Still not.
Still not.
O Complexo de Édipo, foco do debate entre psicanálise e antropologia, também pela French Universitaire de France, primeira edição em 2009, e editado em inglês pela Durkheim. O Casal, uma história pluridisciplinar, pela PUF também, e conta com edições além de francês e inglês, espanhol, coreano, russo, romeno e chinês.
And not in Portuguese.
Ainda não em português.
Not yet.
Aqui, também espanhol, russo, italiano. Freud, a cultura.
Ça, je l'avais présenté. Hein? I have already presented
Publicado
this.
em inglês pela Carnac Books e pela International Psychoanalytical Association. E os dois últimos, o penúltimo do qual nós vamos falar, Sobre Simbolismo e Simbolização, o trabalho de Freud, Durkheim e Mauss. O último livro que o Dr. Éric Smadja está lançando no momento, né? Provavelmente vai ser lançado primeiro agora em português, é Trabalhos com Casais. Vai ser publicado brevemente. Sobre a conferência de hoje,
Oui. Je vais commencer.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. So you understand English, I suppose, and are you all of you?
Todos compreendem inglês, senão eu posso ajudar com a tradução. Você?
Estamos em
Never mind.
Are
Are you?
Levante a mão se não estiver entendendo, a gente, para não ter que fazer uma tradução sistemática e ele poder falar.
C'est-
Speak
oui.
slowly.
Yes, of course. And you know, bon, first of all, I would like to know if you are all of you students in psychology or anthropology, sociology, psychology.
Medical science.
Ah, okay. And you,
From here, from
psychology? Okay, and you? Psychology, okay. So it will be a specific field, what I will tell you. So it's a difficult paper. It will be a difficult paper. So never mind if you don't understand everything, because usually when we try to understand everything, it doesn't work. So you have just to listen.
Is
And-
it okay for you, the English?
Okay. Alors, first of all, I have to tell you a few things in order to understand the context of this paper and this work of research. First of all, so I have two fields of research: couples in a pluridisciplinary approach, and specifically psychoanalytic. And the other field is the history of ideas in social and human sciences. And among the books mentioned by Professor Nelson, there was, for example, Freud and Culture. There was the Oedipus complex, focus of the debate between psychoanalysis and anthropology, which dealt with the conflictual history of relationships between psychoanalysis and anthropology around the issue of the universality of the Oedipus complex. And I presented this work 4 years ago here. So I'm swinging between couples and social and human sciences, and the connection between psychoanalysis and social and human sciences. So in 2018, I published this book directly in English. And because the French publisher were not interested. Why? Because it was too academic. And then the problem is to sell books. So it wasn't very attractive. But my English publisher, American English publisher Routledge, accepted after the process of selection, review, etc. And I think it was a good idea. But this book is follows the previous book on Oedipus complex, because I started to work on Mauss, Durkheim, and I'm very interested. I like very much Émile Durkheim, Marcel Mauss, and this kind of way of thinking, because also because they were neglected by the contemporary, the anthropologists, the contemporary anthropologists and sociologists. There was in France specifically something I don't know what happened, but after or from Lévi-Strauss, there was a sort of censorship concerning Durkheim, and they put away Durkheim and they chose Mauss, and they instituted Marcel Mauss as the precursor of structuralism in Lévi-Strauss. It was Lévi-Strauss himself who decided, and then with Pierre Bourdieu and the others, the followers, Durkheim was the bad object, and Marcel Mauss the good object. It's very interesting if you consider the history of ideas. And so, this book, I wanted to do this book. Why? And it's important to tell you that before I read my paper. Because I like very much Freud. I'm a Freudian, and Freud is a wonderful thinker. And even if the contemporary psychoanalysts are focused on Bion, Winnicott, Melanie Klein, and the others, Lacan, they forgot, most of the time, they forgot Freud and the richness and the deepness of his way of thinking. And when you read and reread and reread, you discover always something new. So I like very much Freud. I like very much Durkheim. I read a lot on Durkheim. I studied a lot on Durkheim for this book specifically, and also his biography, which is very interesting. Maybe I don't know if it's already published in English. It was made by Marcel Fournier. Very interesting. He made a wonderful biography on Durkheim and Mauss. And I love Mauss, the way of thinking of Mauss. So I was in the pleasure to conceive and to work on this book. And as an introduction to my paper, welcome.
Is it all right? Vocês estão entendendo?
Is it okay?
Okay.
Bon. And in my fantasizing activity, in my dreams, daydreams, fantasizing activity, I fantasized an imaginary dialogue between these three thinkers. And I fantasize if Freud met once or two times or three times Durkheim and Mauss, what happened between them? What they could say and discuss together. It was interesting about different topics, about Oedipus complex, about society, etc. But it never happened, of course. And I tried to create an imaginary dialogue with this book. So in this book, if you're interested to buy this book by Amazon, because I'm relatively poor, so I will get, I will be richer if you buy my book. You will discover that it's a very didactic book, because I first present the biography of each thinker, because the biography is very important. It's always important to understand the thoughts of an author. So biography, and then the major creation, the characteristic of the creation of this of each thinker, and then the conception of symbolism and symbolization of each thinkers, and then I try to create a dialogue concerning their ideas, their mutual ideas on symbolism and symbolization. Alors, if I follow my thought, I would say that this cover is symbolic. It's a book on symbolism, and I chose a symbolic cover, of course. This cover, do you recognize this cover, this painting? It's a painting by Cézanne, the cards players. There are three players and an observer. Three players, Freud, Durkheim, and Mauss. And I'm the observer. So it's a symbolic. So you are, from this cover, you are introduced in this imaginary dialogue. Okay. Alors, this book and my paper is a piece of the history of human and social sciences, focused on the discovery and elaboration of the notions of symbolism and symbolization in the fields of human and social sciences from the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century.
Just 1 minute, because two people write. Então, se vocês tiverem algum problema com entender, perguntem, levantem a mão, a gente para, tá bom?
Alors, the purpose was very interesting because, so it's a piece. You have to be aware that it's I relate a piece, just a limited piece of the history of human and social sciences on this discovery, collective and individual. But at the same time, at this time, these three thinkers were founders of human and social sciences. I mean, Freud for psychoanalysis, Durkheim for not sociology. He wasn't the founder of sociology, Durkheim. He was the founder of the French school of sociology, which is revolutionary at his time. And Mauss was the founder of the French modern anthropology. And he was instituted by Lévi-Strauss as the precursor of structuralism. It's a strange, but well. So you can consider that these three thinkers were the founders, the fathers of revolutionary human and social sciences, psychoanalysis, sociology, anthropology, and at the same time they discovered in different ways symbolism and symbolization. Freud, individual and then collective. I will explain you later. Durkheim, exclusively collective symbolism and symbolization, and Mauss, collective and individual. It's okay? But you have to be aware that at their time, when they discovered in different ways, symbolism and symbolization existed in the field of religion and law, but they conceptualized symbolism and symbolization in a different way. So now we start. This theme of symbolism and symbolization, which appeared at the end of the 19th century and, as I told you, in the beginning of the 20th century, would revolutionize the human and social sciences as a whole, all throughout the 20th century, both within each of them, reorganizing thus the diverse aspects of their own epistemological field in different ways and in their interrelationships. Indeed, since the 19th century, the human sciences ranking among the sciences of the mind, grounded in the interpretation, understanding, according to the German Wilhelm Dilthey, had been pervaded and driven by an essential split between, as the philosopher Bruno Carsanti has expressed it, studying human beings from the outside, accomplished through the analysis of their social forms of existence, and studying them from the inside by focusing on the individual ego, conceived of as an entity turned inward. It was the main idea of ego psychology at this time. This split between the collective and the individual principally translates into the separation established between sociology and psychology, which Durkheim would emphatically embrace. By the way, do you know a bit Durkheim and Mauss? Yes, no. Do you know that, no, because it's very interesting, do you know that Durkheim was the uncle of Mauss? And do you know also that they used to live, they grew up in a religious family? You don't know that? It's very important for this. Alors, I make, I would like to give you a precision because it's very important. You know that? You know? Yeah, it's a wonderful history because Durkheim and Mauss. So Mauss was a nephew of Durkheim, and Durkheim was the eldest son of his siblings, family, and his father was a rabbi. And they belonged to a very old Jewish French family. You know, the most important and the first, the oldest French, Jewish French were located in Alsace, in the eastern part of France. And they used to live in Épinal. And they were very well assimilated, acculturated in the French culture. So they were very French adapted, but they were at the same time very religious, except Durkheim and Mauss. And Durkheim was supposed to become a rabbi. And when he was 17, he told his father, no, I don't want to become a rabbi. I want to study sociology, to study education, and to become a teacher. The father accepted. So you have to imagine that Durkheim and Mauss grew up in this context of religious practices, rituals, and they knew very well Jewish religion. And it's not by chance, it's not random that they were interested in religion, especially Durkheim, but also Mauss, because Mauss wrote something very important on magic, but also on sacrifice and so on. So it's very, very important. And the relationship between them was very special because Mauss worked for his uncle. He worked on the review, for example, des Annales sociologiques, who Durkheim created. And so he was very devoted and dedicated to his uncle. And he also, a part of his life, he developed the research and the ideas of Durkheim. But when Durkheim passed away, it was in 1917, I think, or 18, I don't remember, because he had a son who died during the First World War, and then he couldn't bear and accept, he couldn't accept this situation, so he became ill, sick, and then after. And when Durkheim, so the uncle of Mauss, died, Mauss felt free, more free to develop his own thinking. And then he evolved in his way of thinking. He pursued the development of Durkheimian sociology, but at the same time, he developed a specific anthropology freed from certain Durkheimian ideas. Voilà. So now I continue.
By the way, we're going to say that Freud also is from a Jewish religious family.
Yes. So there were three Jewish. So I felt very close to them at the same time. Okay. Is it clear for you? Is it more clear? Okay. So, however, this theme of symbolism and symbolization would become a phenomenon of transition, playing a mediating, connecting role between the individual and collective fields which were separated, okay, as you know, between psychology and sociology, thus acquiring a privileged status deriving from the fact that the phenomena falling into this category undermined the very principle of the duality between interiority and exteriority. So it is that it would contribute, symbolism and symbolization, to eliminating the split between them, then to practically and theoretically unifying them within a new epistemological space. Nevertheless, the recent history of these human sciences enables us to detect two quite distinct epistemological paths converging towards this common theme. It is a matter. It works? Does it work?
Yes, it works.
It works? Ah. It works? Oui, it works, okay. Nevertheless, the recent history of these human sciences enables us to detect two quite distinct, it's important, epistemological paths converging towards this common theme. It is a matter, on the one hand, of that taken by Freud and psychoanalysis, and, on the other hand, of that taken by Durkheim, then Mauss, the French school of sociology with Durkheim, then modern French ethnology, anthropology with Mauss, something which we are going to examine together. Symbolism and symbolization would then become central concepts of the human sciences that would transform the representation and understanding of human beings, societies, and their cultures. However, they prompt us all the same to ask questions about their diverse sources detectable in recent history. But right now, let's explore Freud, Durkheim's, and Mauss' conception of symbolism and symbolization, followed by a necessary and fruitful discussion, which is my imaginary dialogue. Let's start with Freud, symbolism and symbolization. Symbolism and symbolization inaugurated psychoanalysis based on psychotic symptoms and their symbolic meaning, primarily hysterical conversion. Thanks to hysterical patients, Freud discovers symbolism, individual symbolism. So it is that by uncovering the relationships between overt symptoms and their latent meanings reflecting repressed, unconscious contents, Freud discovered and at the same time explored the processes of individual symbolization relating to an essential psychic function. It was only during a second phase that dream symbolism, or the symbolic, as Freud called, entered into the history of psychoanalysis and the young psychoanalytical movement. Then Freud would discover other forms of symbolization, such as circumcision, a collective ritual practice which he would begin reflecting upon in Totem and Taboo. I remind you 1912, 1913, and later children's games as another form of individual symbolization, which he would describe in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, 1920. He would become aware of the symbolizing and symbolic dimension of the analytic arrangement setting he had set up owing to its mode of functioning based on a three-term structure, that of patient, analyst, and the third agency of the setting, including money, conditioning the unfolding of the process of symbolization in patients, notably through verbalization. Freud also realized that transference actualizes another form of displacing a representation to another having a symbolic and symptomatic value and underscoring in exemplary fashion the role and significance of the lost object in the appearing of a process of symbolization. So now let's look at the symptom. Discovery of a process of individual symbolization correlative to the creation of psychoanalysis. The historical symptom was from the beginning considered and designated by Freud as a symbol, a mnesic symbol, he said, of a memory or a repressed fantasy having traumatic value, that is to say, as something definitely inscribed in the body, that of the hysterical person, resulting from a process of substitution of a bodily state for a psychic state, from a conversion linked to an associative connection, it was therefore a matter of individual symbolization, not designated as such, linking symptoms, conscious symbols, to things symbolized unconsciously. In this way, Freud introduced a new unconscious intrapsychic individual dimension into this discovery of symbolization. In addition, the hysteria of conversion showed him the path to follow to highlight the body's symbolizing function and its essential link to the memory. This is how these specific features of the hysteria of conversion, like those of the other psychoneurotic symptoms, like obsessional and phobic, provide Freud with an opening onto the universality of the symbolic function. He then discovered, on the one hand, that individual symbolization associates two representations. It in fact substitutes one representation for another and is therefore a mode of indirect representation. On the other hand, he found that it also connects an affect and a representation, the affect being that of desire and anxiety. He likewise understood that symbolization is, above all, the result of a process presupposing both the ability to represent an absent object and a subject capable of knowing that the symbol is not the object symbolized. Let's discuss now the symbolism of dreams, or what he called the symbolic. Freud defined symbolic relationships, notably in his introductory lectures on psychoanalysis, 1916-1917, as, I quote him, constant translations for a number of dream elements. End of quotation. This element itself being called a symbol of the unconscious dream thought. This relationship between symbol and symbolized was a one-to-one relationship based on resemblance, analogy, evolving towards the natural analogy of form, size, function, frequency, etc. For Freud, the field of the symbolic or system of fixed symbols was extraordinarily large, that of dreams representing but a small part. Moreover, in those other domains, the symbolic was quite obviously not only sexual, unlike in dreams, where the immense majority of symbols were almost exclusively used to represent the sphere of sexual life, genitals, sexed, processed, sexual relations. However, other symbols would represent the human body as a whole, the human person, parents, children, brothers and sisters, birth, nudity, and death. Indeed, this symbolic, which is not specific to dreams and furthermore is shared with psychoneurosis, in fact belonged to the activity of unconscious representation, according his the expression in I repeat because it's not clear. Indeed, this symbolic, which is not specific to dreams and furthermore is shared with psychoneurosis, in fact belonged to the activity of unconscious representation of peoples. It is therefore not only individual, but also collective in nature, and this precision is very important because we will find the same idea with Marcel Mauss later. It's okay? Now, let's go and travel towards Durkheim, symbolization, symbolism, and symbolization, if you are ready. You are ready?
Yes.
Yes. You are enthusiastic to discover? Yes? No? Okay, never mind. Durkheim introduced this reflection in 1818, so almost at the same time of Freud. You see, it's wonderful. Introduced this reflection in 1893 in the division of labor in society, in which law was presented as a symbol of social solidarity. Alors, the division of labor in society was his thesis of philosophy. And he published his thesis in philosophy. It was his thesis. But his ideas were developed most extensively in the famous work of Durkheim, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, in 1912, where he introduced his theory of symbols and a sociological theory of symbolism and symbolization. You can notice, you can or you cannot, never mind, that the Elementary Forms of Religious Life, published in 1912, is contemporary of Totem and Taboo. Wonderful. So, first of all, the Durkheimian symbol. What about the Durkheimian symbol? Durkheim tried to explain the formation of symbols by the effects of major gatherings during which groups become effervescent. It is the originary force of the social energy resulting from the gathering of human beings, which is released in each symbol to constitute them one by one and separately as signifying entities. Treated as a metaphor, a symbol, according to Durkheim, carries within itself a natural link with the reality it symbolizes, which is social reality in this instance. Penal law symbolizes solidarity, the cohesion based on the conformity of all individual consciences, just as in morality, sanction is a symbol of the feeling of obligation. Finally, the totem is both the symbol of the totemic god or principle, but also that of the clan, of society. Thus, what is peculiar to the Durkheimian symbol is the association of force and representation. Force and representation. We will see with Freud, drive and representation. It always translates a collective affective state. Moreover, through their materialization and their objectification in the form of a thing, the emblem or flag, the Durkheimian symbol, makes representable the exteriority of the social, conceived as an external force higher than individuals. It constitutes then, according to the philosopher Bruno Carsanti, a signifying entity for the particular consciences. Symbols also appear as crystallizers and conditions of the durability of social feelings. On the one hand, collective symbols presentify the disappearance of social feelings born in the effervescence of human gatherings which no longer exist. On the other hand, they inscribe them and attach them to things, important persons, real or mythical, so as to keep them always alive, something which allows these collective feelings to become aware of themselves. Symbols are also tools of social communication, allowing individual consciences close to one another to meet, exchange through the mediation of these signs, external to them, therefore social in nature, which then translate, express their inner states. And then symbols are also instruments of collective thought and expression. They express and translate the manner in which society represents itself, thinks itself, and the world surrounding it. Consequently, they are instruments of collective thought, whence religion as a system of symbols, therefore a mode of thinking proper to every society. What about symbolism and symbolization? Now, Durkheim affirmed, on the one hand, the necessity of symbolism for the very existence of human societies, and, on the other hand, the existence of a specificity of symbolisms. In addition, he considered that symbolism came not only to remedy the limitation constitutive of particular consciences, but also represented this social life to them. Durkheim also drew attention to the fact that in the social realm, I quote him, there, far more than elsewhere, the idea creates reality. The idea creates reality. It's very interesting. And that, in addition, in order to express our own ideas to ourselves, we need to anchor them in material things that symbolize them. End of quotation. This is why he considered that collective thought, religious thought in particular, is expressed by combining idealism, creator of reality, and symbolism. Consequently, I consider that Durkheim's conception of symbolism is necessarily accompanied by idealism, creator of reality, which will therefore take on multiple symbolic forms. There are two interdependent processes of the creation, recreation of society. They form a functional pair. That's all for Durkheim for the moment. Now, let's look at Mauss, symbolism and symbolization. The evolution of Mauss thinking is very interesting. As early as a general theory of magic, published in 1902-1903, Mauss and his collaborator Huber advanced a conception of symbol and symbolization and symbol and symbolism, breaking with the Durkheimian conception. Bruno Carcenti, this philosopher you know now, in fact considered that their attempt to conceptualize magical phenomena as social phenomena on the basis of a linguistic model had led them to an initial symbolic formalization of the social unprecedented up until then in French socio-anthropological thought. It should be pointed out that as a philologist, in particular, Mauss was already directly or indirectly confronted with problems of language, translation, and interpretation. Alors, I would like to tell you something about, just shortly, about the general theory of magic, because it's one of the first major works of Mauss in his career, and it's a wonderful essay. It's a really wonderful essay, and what is very specific and special is that Lévi-Strauss plunged in this essay and borrowed many things from this essay to build his structuralism, to build his structuralist revolution in this essay, especially. So it's very interesting to point out this fact. What about symbolism in Mauss, based on first his theory of magic? From the time of general theory of magic, symbols in this essay appeared empty of all representative content, and Mauss highlighted their formal constitution within the framework of a system of signs and social values represented by magic. And Lévi-Strauss transformed system with structure of signs, and you know. From then on, symbols are considered as signs, themselves relative entities. From this hitherto unknown perspective, symbolism would designate the dynamic activity through which signs are determined and produce their meaning through the sole play of their mutual relations, like in the structure conceived and elaborated by Lévi-Strauss. However, while Mauss refused to distinguish between sign and symbol, he did not reduce either symbols to linguistic signs. Moreover, the adoption of the point of view of magic shifts within the symbol itself its dimension of objectification, referring to the Durkheimian subordination of symbols to representations, to that of signification. Indeed, according to Mauss, it is this function of signification itself that asserts itself as preeminent and as primordial condition of the social. Thus, freed from the concept of representation, symbolism assumes an autonomous nature that it could not have had in Durkheim's eyes. But as I told you before, Mauss evolved in his way of thinking and in his way of elaborating his conception of symbols, symbolism, and symbolization. So this first theorization was in 1902, 1903. But now, after the death of his uncle in 1917, Mauss in 1924 was close to the psychologists of his time, the French psychologists like Pierre Janet, and he became a member of the Psychological Society. And at this time, he tried to make connection with psychology, which Durkheim rejected. Actually, Durkheim was very interested in psychology. And in order to build, in order for epistemological, methodological, and historical reasons, Durkheim wanted to found, to create a specific sociology which is separated from psychology. Alors, I have to clarify this point, because If not, you don't understand the way. You agree? Yes, you agree, of course. If you don't agree, never mind. But it's a very important to understand this point. At the time of Durkheim, what was the situation of the historical situation of the sociology in the world, but specifically in Europe, of course, because in Brazil it didn't exist at this time. Of course. Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte was the founder of sociology. So at the time of Durkheim, sociology was a kind of big psychology. The sociologists like Tard, Gabriel Tard, Gustave Le Bon, and so on. Gabriel Tard was the rival of Durkheim. And at this time, Gabriel Tard, the main sociologist of his time, viewed the society like a big individual, an extension of the individuals. So he couldn't conceive the society, so this collective reality, as a specific and new reality, different from the individual reality. It's very important to think, to be aware of this fact. And then the Durkheimian revolution at his time was to think and to consider that the collective reality, which is society, is a new reality, completely different from the individual reality. It's no more, for Durkheim, the society is no more a big individual. It is a new reality. And if we think in another way, in the psychological field, you know that Didier Anzieux, Fuchs in United Kingdom, Didier Anzieux in France, and René Caès, but first Didier Anzieux, at their time, we couldn't think that a group has its own reality with specific organizers and specific functions, processes. We thought that it was an extension also of the individual psyche. And then with Didier Anzieux, Fuchs in the United Kingdom, and Bion in also, they revolutionized this field of research because they considered that the psychic reality of any group is specific, different from individual reality. So if I go back now to Durkheim, it was a revolution. And if you want to go further in this kind of discovering and understanding, you can read Les règles de la méthode sociologique by Durkheim. It's a wonderful essay where he set the main principles of his new sociology. It's a wonderful. So Durkheim needs to separate psychology from sociology, but at the same time he was very ambivalent, because when you read carefully Durkheim's writings, you see that there are many psychology, and he was fond of psychology, but he needed to separate psychology from sociology. And Mauss, at his time, 1924, Durkheim is dead, so he felt free to consider that, no, I want to be close to psychology, and I want to make a connection. So Mauss tried to make a connection. Durkheim tried to separate, and Mauss felt the desire to make connections between psychology and sociology. Individual reality, collective reality. This paper, this writing, 1924, the title is Real and Practical Relations Between Psychology and Sociology, is a major paper written by Mauss, and with this paper there's a shift from the Durkheimian sociology to the Maussian anthropology, and a shift towards an anthropology of symbolic. And from this essay, this paper, this lecture, it was a lecture in fact, it was a lecture presented before the Society of Psychology. From this essay, this shift will continue, will be pursued with Lévi-Strauss. And Lévi-Strauss was very inspired by this writing. Kabitaro, especially a sociologist and specifically a sociologist of religions, considers this lecture to have marked the birth of the anthropology of the symbolic, as I told you, or the shift from Durkheimian sociology towards the problem of the symbolic. Mauss presented symbols as being common, permanent signs external to individual mental states, which allow people to communicate with one another, but also to be in communion. These characteristics attest in this way to their social, non-individual origin. The very notion of symbol is the mediating function, the mediating agency discovered by Mauss to connect psychology and sociology, the individual to the collective. From then on, the psychic and the social become two modalities and two points of view about the same human reality of the total human being and the total social fact. From this unprecedented perspective, symbolization is going to be played out and replayed on the interface of all these dimensions. It is therefore not the exclusive property of the sociologist, but it also concerns the psychologist and even the biologist too. Mauss also proposes several things. The symbolic aspect of the social fact and the world of teeming symbolic relationships which constitutes all social life. Then he brings up the fundamental central notion of the symbolic activity of the mind, as collective as it is individual, of unconscious nature. So you see the proximity with Freudian thought. The former proving more simple. Alors, là, there's a problem between Freud and Durkheim, Freud and Mauss, but we will see later. I repeat because it's important. He brings up the fundamental central notion of the symbolic activity of the mind as collective as it is individual, of course, of unconscious nature. Unconscious nature, he said, Mauss. Interesting, yeah? The former, which is collective, proving more symbolic than the latter, which is individual. We'll see later. It is only a matter there, according to him, of a difference of intensity and species, but not of kind, something which makes it possible to explain important elements of, for example, myths, rites, beliefs, collective delirium. Nevertheless, this notion of symbolic activity of the mind also functions as a mediation connection between the individual and collective fields. Thus, no split any longer exist between the social and the individual, but rather transitions, mediations, relationships of interdependence. This notion of symbolic activity, unconscious in nature, will be taken again by Lévi-Strauss. What is more, he fully recognized that symbolic thought is the primary form of human thought, underlying all thought, and he strove to recognize its activity in all the strata of the social. Moreover, Mauss did not hesitate to set up relationships of translation between all the levels of the real, between the sociological, psychological, the biological, between society and individuals. Mauss identified the mechanism of production of meaning that is at the heart of social life and which is, in a sense, prior to it, even if it is only actualized, realized in and by it. It is a matter of the symbolic function. Finally, Mauss' thought enables one to go beyond the Durkheimian finding that social life would not be possible without symbolism. Mauss affirms that symbolism is what makes social life possible and produces it. It is the very condition of existence of groups as groups. Moreover, Mauss came to think that it's very interesting. This part is very interesting because moreover, Mauss came to think that social particularities specifically result from processes of symbolization. That is to say, from agreements that are non-universal, therefore arbitrary, but are particular and necessary, or at least functional, for people obliged to live in groups. Thus, each society produces its own symbolizations. Mauss then clearly set down the terms of the dialectic of the human universal and the social particular. What interested Mauss about instinct now? Another notion he discussed. Alors, I would like just to clarify this aspect between concerning the dialectic of the human universal and the social particular, because you know that well, we have to contextualize the debates in the 20s, 30s, in the domain of anthropology, the mondial anthropology in America, for example, the relativism with Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead and so on. They were focused on the relativism, which means there's no universality in cultural matter domain. Everything is particular. And then when I wrote my book on the Oedipus complex, the focus of the debate between anthropology and psychoanalysis, I related this debate between culturalism and universalism, between psychoanalysis, which defends the universalism of the human nature, which was rejected by the culturalist movement, which was born in the United States, which defended the particularities of any culture. So there's nothing universal, everything is particular. And what Mauss raises now here, it's very interesting, because as Durkheim said before, Durkheim defended the idea of some universal characteristics of the human nature. And he said that psychology, one of the purposes of psychology is to discover human and universal characteristics of the human being. Universal characteristics. But sociology and later anthropology discovers the particularities of societies. So when Mauss affirms that there's a human nature which is universal, but there's also particularisms which are connected with symbolizations. It's very interesting because we can understand that there's a universal dimension of the human being, but in societies and cultures you can find particularities connected with particular symbolizations. Wonderful. Well, congratulations to Mauss. Mauss is an agency of mediation. A good negotiator.
Yes, very, very interesting.
Alors, I will finish with Mauss with his notion of instinct. In his revolutionizing lecture he presented to the Society of Psychology, he also mentioned instincts, but not in the same meaning or way of Freud, of course. But it's interesting. I will tell you why before. What interested Mauss about instincts, another notion he discussed and developed, is the relationship obtaining between representations, acts, the body, and especially instincts and things. In addition, he considered that this part of instinct was even much greater when it came to collective psychology. Interesting. He in fact considered that people can only produce and communicate through symbols because they share the same instincts. Incredible. Huh? Of which states of exaltation, of effervescence, ecstasies, creators of ideals and symbols are proliferations, whence the functional instinct symbol pair in Mauss. You remember in Durkheim, the functional pair I detected was idea and symbol, and Mauss instinct and symbol. So now it's time to tell you something about the imaginary dialogue or elements of discussion. Alors, but I would like to add something, if I may. Of course. I'm allowed to discuss. Huh? Of course. Huh?
Belinda is our chief.
You remember I told you something about instincts, huh? Mentioned by Mauss. Lévi-Strauss will create his structuralist revolution based especially on the essay on the theory, the general theory on magic. Okay, you remember the system of signs, any content, no content, only relationship, mutual relationship between signs, and the signification raises from these mutual relationships. He will take up again this model to found his structural model. Okay. But the problem of Lévi-Strauss is to select what he's interested in Mauss, and he rejects what he doesn't like. And he rejected instincts body, and so on. So it's interesting to us from a historical point of view that Lévi-Strauss decided himself to institute Mauss as the precursor of his theory, his structuralist revolution, but he didn't borrow everything in Mauss. He selected another thing, and he rejected body instinct. Strange. As I said, he made his market. He made his shopping in Mauss. Take this, I take it, and then I cook with what I'm interested in, and I reject what I don't want. And when you read, for example, by Lévi-Strauss, you know, I don't remember because I'm angry at Lévi-Strauss. Because in one book, a small book, but very interesting book, I don't remember the name, he wrote, I hate instincts, I hate, he rejected, incredible. So, after this discussion, I can tell you something, if you want, about the destiny of this theorization in the French sociology and anthropology. Because Lévi-Strauss rejected instinct body, which was very important for Mauss, especially, and Françoise Héritier, with her anthropology of the body and the symbolic of the body, she will reintroduce instinct body. And you know, Françoise Héritier was a student of Lévi-Strauss. Well, okay. So now let's discuss some elements of, and we now, I think that you would like me to tell you something about the discussion and the dialogue. So concerning the symbols, Durkheim developed, as you know, an objective, substantialist and representative conception of symbols, establishing a univocal relationship between symbols and what is symbolized. Unlike Mauss, who, from the time of general theory of magic, emptied symbols of all representative content, and through analogy with the linguistic signs, attributed a purely formal relative dimension to them. Symbols do not connect predetermined terms, but signs which are relative entities whose meaning pertains to the interplay of their mutual relations within the system they form together. We will find this aspect again in Lévi-Strauss' theorization of his structures. Looking at the representative dimension of symbols, Durkheim's and Freud's approaches seem to converge there, as well as from the point of view individual relationship of symbol and what is symbolized. However, let us remember that in Freud, all forms of representations, indirect and figurative, are symbolic of an unconscious desire. Dreams, slips of tongue, symptoms, Freudian slips in particular, and the requirement to connect affects accounts for the specific nature of the symbolization inherent in the formations of the unconscious, therefore for the concealment of the relationship between the symbol and what is symbolized. However, would Durkheim's collective symbols indirectly represent an unconscious collective desire, such as individual formations of the unconscious? This notion of unconscious desire obviously does not have a place in Durkheimian terminology, of course. Moreover, Freud and Durkheim meet on common ground when it comes to the conjunction of force and meaning, drive and meaning, that would constitute every symbolic representation, while Mauss' early reference to the linguistic model would distance him considerably from Durkheim, but also from Freud. Indeed, in Durkheim, collective representations are forces, and in Freud, individual representations are modality of psychic expression of the instinct, itself defined as the border concept between, as you know, the somatic and the psychic. But with this respect to this, were Durkheim and Freud talking about the same thing when it came to the notion of representation? Certainly not. As for Mauss, remember that in his 1924 lecture, the notion of symbol became the agency of mediation and of connection between the social and the psychological, between the collective and the individual, something which distanced him all the more from Durkheim, but at the same time drew him nearer to Freud. He considered that the social becomes a dimension of all human phenomena, like the psychic and biological, moreover. In addition, he would reintroduce the body alongside the psychic and the social through instinct and rhythm, and would associate instinct and symbol. Note that this motion, instinct, symbol pair is found again in a certain way in Freud, notably in his understanding of hysterical symptoms, bringing him to discover that the human body, erogenous body, and instinct are sources of symbolization. Let's discuss now symbolism and symbolization. You are not so tired, no?
No.
It's okay. What is...
I'm just worried about
yes.
the time.
The time.
We are 11:30, and I think we
Half
should
past
have
11?
at least 15 minutes to discuss, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that it's okay? If
Yes,
we reach 15
I
minutes
finished.
more?
I finished.
Okay,
Yes,
yes.
it's okay. It's
And
okay.
then we
I'm
have
relaxed.
some time to talk.
Yes, of course. You, are you? Yes, you.
Is it
You
okay?
agree? Yes, it's okay for you.
Okay.
Yes. You are not boring. No, it's okay. Not so tired or exhausted. No, ça va. Bon. So, symbolism and symbolization now. Durkheim took into account the exclusively collective dimension of symbolism. Exclusively collective dimension. Durkheim, huh? Okay. If you have an exam, Durkheim, exclusively collective dimension. Okay. It was the matter of the language of every society expressing ideas, feelings, images in this way. It constituted both an instrument of intersubjective communication and a factor of communion and social unity. But it was also the way of thinking of every collectivity, enabling it not only to reflect upon itself, but also to represent to itself its environment and its relationships with it. Remember that this symbolism is accompanied by what he called idealism, creator of reality, something which would correspond to the collective imaginary activity depicted by symbols, language of the social imaginary. This is the way it is with religious thought in particular. Through this notion of idealism, we find similarities with the Freudian notion of sizing activity, which would be symbolized in various different forms. Moreover, detectable in this field of collective symbolism, as thought and elaborated by Durkheim, are the two processes of symbolization discovered by Freud in his clinic of neurosis. On the one hand, that of association between two representations, and on the other hand, that of the linking of an affect by a representation. Likewise, we identify the role and importance of the object lost in the appearance of a process of collective symbolization, notably in the symbolization of social feelings. Thus, when Durkheim declares that in order to express our ideas to ourselves, we need to anchor them in material things that symbolize them, then when social feelings endure through the symbols, we find both the link between two representations, symbolized and symbolizing, and the representation connecting an affect, making its mastery possible. Symbolization of what no longer exists, the affect of mourning, the pain of loss and of absence, will consequently be able to find a material or ideal representation which will link this affect, all the while presentifying the absence, something which Freud objectivized remarkably through his analysis of the bobbin game. But contrary to Mauss, Durkheim would hold on to this collective symbolic activity, therefore excluding any possible connection with individual thought. In this Durkheimian conceptualization, there is definitely the concern to establish and maintain a solution of continuity between the social realm and the psychological realm that he was to establish for identity and epistemological reasons. It was a matter of founding sociology as a science finally emancipated from philosophy, psychology, and biology, even though we find in Durkheim, as I told you before, a double language, biological and psychological, as well as a biological paradigm, even also the temptation to make sociology into a special psychology, sui generis, or a collective psychology, because of the necessary study of collective representations. For his part, Mauss related symbolism to the symbolic activity of the human mind, whether collective or individual, and fully recognized that symbolic thought was the primary form of human thought, that it underlies all thought. With this symbolic activity of the mind, there no longer exists, unlike in Durkheim, any split between the social and the individual, but rather transitions, mediations, relationships of interdependence. In addition, it is no longer a matter of only saying, as his uncle did, that social life would be impossible without symbolism. One must add that symbolism is just simply the necessary condition for any group. Tarot, the sociologist of religions, rightly considers that this problem of symbolization seems to furnish the true field for observing the relationships between Durkheim and Mauss, and consequently the transition from one to the other. Indeed, while Durkheim proposed a sociological theory of symbolization, Mauss introduced us to a symbolic theory of society fitting into the framework of the elaboration of an anthropology of the symbolic as a deep orientation which, from that time on, he proposed to sociology and anthropology, but also as a project in which he invited specialists of the social and human sciences to participate. For his part, Freud would tackle the collective dimension of symbolism using the vast field of the symbolic, of which dreams were a part. considering that the immense majority of dream symbols were sexual symbols, and observing a distinct contrast between the wealth of sexual symbols and the paucity of things symbolized by multiple quasi-equivalent symbols, he could not refrain from assuming the existence of a particularly close relationship between genuine symbols and sexuality, something to which Durkheim and Mauss would certainly not subscribe, of course. In addition, the symbolic appears, according Freud, the possibility of a certain universal language or fundamental language which subjects would have at their disposal beyond the diversity of cultures and languages, and which, in certain cases or on certain points, would then permit trans-individual deciphering. He, in fact, discovered, on the one hand, that this symbolic was shared with psychoneurosis, where the most elements were preserved, something which allows us, moreover, the most profound understanding of this fundamental language. On the other hand, Freud found that it actually belonged, the symbolic, belonged to the activity of a conscious representation of peoples. It was therefore not only individual in nature, but also collective in nature. Detectable, there is therefore a major point of convergence between Mauss and Freud with regard to the human foundations of symbolism, something which obviously distanced them from Durkheim. Mauss held that it was a matter of a production of symbolic activity of the mind, whether individual or collective, while Freud called the activity of unconscious representation the activity of individuals or peoples, which could connect individual productions such as symptoms and dreams, and collective productions, myths, legends, and other things. Elsewhere, he would talk about the notion of activity of human mind in 1924. Both confer upon this activity of the human mind, unconscious on the one hand and symbolic on the other, the status and the role of mediation, of transition among the three dimensions of all human reality: biological, psychological, and social. Relationships of translation and expression would exist among them. However, by associating neurotic symptoms and repressed sexual content on the one hand, and dream symbols and essentially sexual content on the other, consequently by underpinning this activity of unconscious representation by desire, Freud radically diverged from Mauss. And yet, he had written that magic is the domain of the desire in 1902. But there is not a matter of sexual desire in Mauss thought. Moreover, let me emphasize with Freud the contrast between the paucity of unconscious symbolized things and the wealth of symbols and symbolic thought, a characteristic to which Mauss would subscribe. In contrast, when Mauss emphasized that social particularities are arbitrary, he said arbitrary, but necessarily functioning because of the constraints of life in a group, and that they result from processes of symbolization, he was both near to Freud and far from him when he dealt with individual symptoms, which in fact proceed from individual symbolizations, therefore from non-universal individual particularities. Nonetheless, they are not arbitrary, but over-determined, grounded in unconscious fantasies referring to the infantile lives of subjects. In this respect, Freud probably draws closer to the Durkheimian notion of idealism, creator of reality, relative to the activity of the collective imaginary filled with needs, desires, feelings, expectations, hopes, and ideals, but quite obviously devoid of sexual content. Moreover, writing in Mothers and Monotheism, 1930, alors, 9, about the universality of symbolic of the language and of the symbolic relation detectable in children and in dreams, Freud related them to thought dispositions, meaning to innate contents, representing elements of an archaic or phylogenetic legacy. He thus came to affirm that the dreams and neuroses, as well as cultural productions, such as the most ancient legends and ancient usages, among other things, would be the depositories of the contents of the archaic legacy transmitted from generation to generation. It is quite probable that Mauss and Durkheim would have rejected this notion of archaic legacy, especially Mauss, who had already opposed the evolutionist thought of his uncle. Finally, because you are tired, and me too, one last reflection. Freud could refute Mauss' statement addressed to psychologists in these words. Whereas, I quote Mauss in his lecture, whereas you describe these cases of symbolism only quite rarely and often within series of abnormal facts, we apprehend great numbers of them all the time and within immense series of normal facts. Indeed, while Freud brought to light the work on the symbolization of neurotic symptoms, he also showed in an exemplary fashion that dreams, daily, normal individual projections are another form of symbolic production, which draws both upon the collective symbolic and upon the individual work of symbolization, disguising in this way the latent thoughts bearing notably infantile sexual fantasies, just as the ludic activity of children, but also the diverse forms of individual artistic creation in particular, represent many other normal individual symbolic productions. By way of conclusions, fortunately, oh, it's good. These few elements of discussion highlight notably the irreducible differences and specific features of the unconscious intrapsychic individual and sociocultural and historical collective realities determining a thought and an appropriate language, fashioning singular epistemological fields. However, the participation of ideology and identity issues can contribute to reinforcing these essential differences, which is obvious in Durkheim as opposed to Mauss, who rightly strove to apprehend the three dimensions of the total human being, but with methodological tools coming from sociology, ethnology, from historical criticism, as well as from linguistics and psychology. However, for all that, we are dealing with human reality, which is so very complex. This is why inevitable convergences exist, which I have also tried to identify. And I thank you for your critical attention, but also benevolent.
Thank you so much, Eric, for such a wonderful lecture full of thoughts and such a deep reflection on the relations between these three so important theories in the human sciences field. So we may open the questions to the audience, and if we have time. Você fala em português ou em inglês? Português? Eu traduzo, tá bom. Eu translate. Só um minuto, eu vou parcelar para... she would like she would like to know your reflections about if there is this separation between the individual and social symbolization. If it would be possible for the media to convey things, to communicate through the unconscious signification of symbols. Or if it would not be possible because of the particularities of the cultural contexts. If there is this kind of potentiality of...
Could you repeat the question?
Les médias seraient capables de transmettre des informations à partir de cette conception des symboles inconscients. À partir c'est un peu écarté de votre conférence.
Je comprends pas la question. Est-ce que les médias seraient des médias? Enfin, qu'est-ce que je veux dire par là?
Ça pourrait engager ces symboles inconscients. Oui. Là,
alors, de toute façon, je vais peut-être répondre en français, puis tu pourras traduire peut-être.
Ok.
Alors, là, il faut reprendre, pour répondre à votre question, il faudrait reprendre tout simplement la théorie de Durkheim, c'est-à-dire que toute société fonctionne et communique avec des symboles collectifs. Et que ces symboles collectifs sont appris dès l'enfance dans le milieu familial et par l'éducation.
Et que ces symboles sont appris dès l'enfance no meio familiar et por l'éducation.
Alors justement, les médias, c'est intéressant que vous fassiez référence aux médias parce que Durkheim justement disait que il a vu des choses très intéressantes parce que Durkheim disait que ah oui, excusez-moi, oui, bien sûr, oui.
É interessante que você tenha trazido essa questão, porque justamente Durkheim, muito cedo, ele...
Oui, donc Durkheim disait que justement la société utilise un certain type de mode de communication collective.
Dizia que a sociedade utiliza certo modo de comunicação coletiva
qui va avoir un impact sur l'individu.
Et terá impacto sobre os indivíduos.
Et pour reprendre votre question, il disait dans son livre, que je vous recommande de lire, Les formes élémentaires de la vie religieuse.
Et para retomar sua questão, ele comenta no livro As formas elementares da vida religiosa.
Dans les rassemblements populaires, collectifs, politiques ou religieux, on utilise souvent des formules courtes, mais qui ont un impact sur l'individu, sur le groupe et sur l'individu.
E nas reuniões coletivas se usa em geral fórmulas muito curtas que têm impacto tanto sobre os grupos quanto sobre os indivíduos.
Et la publicité, elle utilise ça.
E a publicidade utiliza isso.
Ils ont trouve des formules efficaces qui ont un impact sur le groupe et sur chacun des individus.
Bom,
Posso
Et,
soltar
oui,
contigo?
oui, bien sûr.
I would have other comments, but I would like to follow the question because, on the other hand, it's a field where we could also resort to Freud and the idea of this kind of capture, the media kind of capturing the personal psychology of each one of us, or the unconscious desires, to kind of convey certain ideas or ideologies or desires, the production of desires, Marcuse, for example, no, the idea of this kind of engagement of our even bodily needs to certain in certain ways of consumption or thinking, and so it's a very interesting field. I mean, media and propaganda, to think about these connections between Durkheim on one side and the collective representations and their imposal on individuals, and also the capture of Freud ideas of desire and instincts and so on.
Alors,
I think so.
Alors, ce qui est important, je vais parler en français, oui. Ce qui est important, justement, c'est vraiment cette découverte de l'activité inconsciente de l'inconscient, de l'activité inconsciente de l'esprit, de l'activité de symbolisation inconsciente. Oui.
que é muito importante é essa descoberta da atividade de simbolização inconsciente
De l'esprit humain.
do espírito humano.
Et si l'on dit esprit humain,
E uma vez que se diz espírito humano,
il est à la fois individuel et collectif.
ele é simultaneamente individual e coletivo.
On n'a plus besoin de dire des individus et des peuples, comme disait Freud, mais Freud, en 1924, parlait de l'esprit, de l'activité de représentation inconsciente de l'esprit humain. Et, vas-y. Oui.
Não é mais preciso falar dos povos e do indivíduo, como falava Freud, mas em 1924 ele começou a falar.
Et ça, c'est
Commencé a falar,
en 1924, il a dit ça.
a dit,
L'activité de représentation inconsciente de l'esprit humain.
ele usou essa expressão em 1924, a atividade de simbolização inconsciente do espírito.
Et de cette manière-là, il n'y a plus de séparation entre l'individu et l'individuel et le collectif.
Dessa maneira não há mais separação entre o individual e o coletivo.
Mais en même temps, j'ajouterais que ce qu'a écrit, ce que je vous ai décrit chez Durkheim, c'est à propos de la symbolisation collective et du symbolisme collectif, c'est toujours valable, c'est fondamental, c'est toujours valable.
Eu queria também acrescentar que aquilo que Durkheim escreveu a propósito da simbolização coletiva e do espírito coletivo ainda é válido hoje.
C'est valable. Toutes les sociétés ont besoin de se représenter, de communiquer par symbole, déjà,
Todas as sociedades têm necessidade de se representar e se comunicar por símbolos,
et que les enfants, dans leur éducation, à la fois dans la famille et à l'école et quand ils grandissent, l'éducation familiale et l'éducation scolaire et plus tard, eh bien, ont pour fonction d'apprendre à ces enfants et ces adolescents les symbolismes collectifs.
e a educação, tanto na família quanto escolar, tem a função de ensinar essas crianças o simbolismo coletivo.
C'est une manière ça fait partie des processus de socialisation de tout individu.
Isso faz parte dos processos de socialização de todo e qualquer indivíduo.
Donc ces conceptualisations-là, sont fondamentales. Et puis, je pourrais rajouter aussi les liens donc là, entre la force et la représentation. Et là, avec, donc, entre Freud et Durkheim, il y a une convergence là, très importante.
E aí a ligação entre a força e a representação, tanto em Durkheim quanto em Freud, há uma convergência sobre isso.
Et puis, une dernière chose, enfin, si vous n'avez pas de questions, je vais continuer.
Mais uma coisa,
J'ai continué ma réflexion, mais je vous disais tout à l'heure que Mauss a bien établi l'antagonisme et la connexion entre l'universel humain et le particulier social et culturel.
Eu disse também que sublinhar que Marcel Mauss ele estabeleceu muita clareza o antagonismo entre o universal
Humain et le particulier social et culturel.
e o particular social e cultural.
Vous savez qu'il y a il y a toujours cette controverse autour de l'universalité du complexe d'Oedipe.
Sempre você sabe que houve sempre essa controvérsia em torno da universalidade do complexo de Édipo.
Si vous lisez mon livre, enfin si vous l'achetez d'abord, donc je pourrais devenir un peu plus riche, comme vous le savez, et je décris justement les différentes conceptions du complexe d'Oedipe, et je décris le débat avec tous les différents auteurs, psychanalystes dans l'histoire, hein, et anthropologues et sociologues.
Se vocês lerem o livro Freud e a Cultura, né?
Non, c'est le complexe d'Oedipe, cristallisateur du débat psychanalyse-anthropologie.
O complexo de Édipo, foco do debate entre psicanálise e antropologia.
Si vous achetez le livre, ça permettra de...
compilado entre todas as posições a respeito, diferenças a respeito do complexo de Édipo.
Si vous achetez mon livre, je pourrais me payer un billet d'avion pour São Paulo l'année prochaine.
Se vocês comprarem o livro dele, eles vão conseguir comprar mais bilhete de avião para vir
Bon,
a São Paulo no ano que vem.
alors cette notion d'antagonisme, de dialectique entre universel humain et particulier social et culturel, on le retrouve concernant le complexe d'Oedipe et ses manifestations sociales et culturelles, ses symbolisations sociales et culturelles.
Essa oposição do universal humano e o particular cultural, ela se cristaliza particularmente na noção de complexo de Édipo.
En clair, lorsque certains psychanalystes dans l'histoire de la psychanalyse et certains anthropologues, ou même beaucoup d'anthropologues, ont rejeté l'universalité du complexe d'Oedipe en disant que dans telle société, il n'y a pas de complexe d'Oedipe et dans telle autre, etc., on peut comprendre, en fait, beaucoup mieux avec les idées de Marcel Mauss.
Ainda que muitos psicanalistas e antropólogos tenham rejeitado a universalidade do complexo de Édipo, a partir do conceito dessa polaridade introduzida por Marcel Mauss entre o universal humano e o particular cultural, é possível, sim, dar uma nova compreensão a essa falsa oposição.
Parce que le complexe d'Oedipe est un organisateur psychique humain.
Porque o complexo de Édipo é organizador psíquico humano.
On se construit psychiquement avec l'Oedipe.
Nós nos construímos psiquicamente a partir do Édipo, com o Édipo.
Quelles que soient les organisations familiales et les systèmes de parenté qui existent dans le monde et dans l'histoire, l'Oedipe est structurel.
Independentemente das organizações familiares e culturais das várias sociedades, o complexo de Édipo é estruturante, estrutural.
Mais comme Mauss l'a élaboré, et comme il a parlé des symbolisations sociales,
Como Mauss elaborou e falou de simbolizações sociais,
on va retrouver différentes formes de symbolisation sociale et culturelle en fonction des sociétés
é possível encontrar diferentes formas de socialização e organização cultural em diferentes sociedades.
De même qu'on va retrouver des manifestations de l'Oedipe dans la structuration des institutions et des pratiques sociales et culturelles. On va les retrouver aussi dans différents secteurs de la société.
E por isso que você vai encontrar o complexo de Édipo em diferentes estruturações e instituições da sociedade.
Dans des rituels, dans des mythes, on va avoir des représentations oedipiennes sous formes différentes parce que ça relève de la symbolisation collective définie par Mauss, justement. On va retrouver des symbolisations collectives oedipiennes
vamos reencontrar simbolizações coletivas edifiantes
dans différents secteurs d'une société, que ce soit les mythologies,
diferentes setores da sociedade, seja na mitologia,
les rituels,
rituais,
les institutions et toutes sortes.
instituições, etc.
Bon.
Certo?
We would have so much more to talk about. I would have to some comments to make, but we we are already midday, more than midday. If it's very quick, because we have to close. Okay. Just one question. Sim. Em francês ou would you prefer in French or in English? Ok. Você traduz? Tá.
Não tenho treinamento de tradução técnica.
E uma pergunta breve.
Ah, magnifique. Alors, c'est très bien. Durkheim, le suicide, c'est magnifique. C'est un très beau texte. Alors, what I speak in English, I respond in English. What is very interesting in the suicide is not the proximity with mass psychology, but with I don't remember in English. Non, le malaise dans la culture. It's much better to compare the suicide and this malaise dans la culture. It's much closer because they both observe. They are both observers of the problematic and really concerning social reality and critical reality, maybe pathological reality. Nowadays, I think we are in a pathological society, but at that time, it was a critical reality. And suicide and this text, Malaise dans la culture, are closer to each other. Nevertheless, mass psychology is a wonderful essay, and but I think maybe you can find some similarities. Certain points are interesting to compare, but it's better to read at the same time Malaise dans la culture. But it's a wonderful, I reread this book, this essay, Mass Psychology, for my seminar on couples, and it's amazing. Yes, amazing.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your second visit at USP, and you are now our permanent guest and speaker. Please, we hope you. Yes. Então, são os avisos. Nós deixamos uma lista com nomes e e-mails. Quem não assinou para ter certificado, põe um nome e o e-mail. Nós vamos mandar o certificado por e-mail, ok? Por favor. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Então, vocês assinam aqui a lista, por favor? Nelson, você vai levar os papéis depois? He helped you to come back to São Paulo. He paid for the online version of the book. Great, great. He Ok, obrigada, boa tarde. Obrigada pela presença. Você assinou aqui? Tá ótimo, gente. Tudo de bom.